webinar. We're doing that together with Dr. Alan Hopkins. You guys might have seen us do this together a few months ago, and I don't know what we were thinking, but we went on for over 3 hours. It was kind of like, I remember we were going to like 9 or 10 p.m. my time, and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's even later for you guys because you are central. So anyway, this time around, we've decided to streamline our slides and create checklists for you, so it's really, really clear where to get started. Dutch is not everything. There's a lot of other tests that you can get done beforehand. And so that's really what we want to talk about today in this presentation. So we're going to talk about, we'll give you a sense of context for about 45 minutes is the presentation. We're going to cover what labs is really great to order, where can you order them. We've divided them into foundational, so like things that are really, really important that govern your hormonal balance. And then a couple of optional labs that we're going to present to you. We're going to explain why that is really important. We're going to explain what's the difference between saliva and urine and blood testing, and what's good for which hormones. So I think you're going to learn a ton, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So everything is getting recorded. In case you need to drop off earlier, don't worry about it. We'll send you the replay. I think the email is going out tomorrow with a replay link. Right. What I think is really empowering about this is the service that Dr. Alan Hopkins and his wife have created is just the ability for you to order your labs by yourself without having to go and beg your doctor, negotiate, feel dismissed, feel like this happened to me a couple of times as well, where you talk to your doc about testing certain things and you think that is all covered, and then she gives you the requisition form, and then you look at it and it's like all the different things you really wanted are missing, and that's it drives you crazy. And you go back and you say, why didn't you take it? And she will give you a reason why not, right? So this is really where the power comes back to you on wanting to do what taking care of your health. I will say that there's a couple of states in the United States. If you're in overseas as well, unfortunately, this is not going to help either. So treat this as a hugely educational platform. Certain states in the United States, and Dr. Allen, help me out here. So it's New York, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Maryland.
And that's it. Yeah,
those
are the 4 restricted states that don't allow direct access lab testing.
Right. So yeah, unless you're registered somewhere else, that you can go travel to another state and order, but you have to have a driver's license from another state. So those are, but if you're in those states, then there's nothing we can do about it. Really, it's a state regulation. But what you can do is just learn from this, and then go and negotiate with your doctor and take the checklist, print it out, and then get covered. So why don't we get started with a presentation?
Okay, fantastic. Well, everyone, welcome. I really appreciate you guys having me. It's always an honor to come to people and educate them, particularly when they're very interested in what we're talking about. So hormones are always an interesting subject. I can tell you as a practitioner, it's very challenging. There's lots of various tests out there that we have to consider. And so we're going to try to help you with that. We're going to try to break it down and make it easy. Just to give you some background on who I am, I'm a medical doctor. I have an MD degree from Loma Linda University Medical Center. I currently have some teaching responsibilities here at the University of Texas at Austin. Outside of that, I have an integrative practice and I'm an emergency medicine doctor. So I'm a pretty busy guy. A few years ago, I noticed that people were having real trouble with high deductibles and less coinsurance for labs, and they were skipping getting testing done. And what I noticed is that there's probably a way for them to save money. And I really looked into trying to help out that. I started a company called Your Lab Work. This is where consumers can go and order their own blood test without having to see their doctor first. And this is really cool because it gives people a platform to really get their own individual data and to really learn about it. So our goal and our passion and how we're different from other people is we really try to push a lot of education. So thank you for joining us tonight. You can reach out to us, support@yourlabwork.com. We do have an 855 number here listed that you can always write down if you have specific questions and want to talk to a human being, because at the end of the line is we are human, so it's great to talk to us. If you want to go to the chat box, we also have a chat box on yourlabwork.com. My experience largely has been very interesting. We worked with NBC's Biggest Loser, the Oprah Winfrey Show, and so on, really cutting our teeth learning about the advanced biomarkers and which ones are important, which ones particularly change when you have significant weight loss in the case of the NBC's Biggest Loser. And so we learned a lot of really, really important lessons. So last time we kind of had a real long presentation. This one here was going to be very, very focused. And the first thing I want to say is, let me help you understand a little bit about what we can't miss when it comes to hormones. And we really can't miss what we call the hormone foundation. And this is really looking at biomarkers of inflammation, metabolism, nutrients, and something we call core tests. This is really the first thing that really needs to be done, because until these are addressed and optimized, we're probably always going to have issues with our hormones, because these things can dramatically affect our hormone levels. So before we jump and we do specific hormone testing, we like to make sure we have this foundation in place. So really, we start with the hormone foundation, and then the next step is to look specifically at the thyroid, or specifically for estrogen dominance. There's always issues around peri and menopause. There's a lot of, bioidentical hormone replacement therapy going on. We're going to really talk about what's the best test to monitor that over time. And then, of course, adrenals. We're always interested in stress and sleep and how our adrenals are functioning. And we're going to talk about the tests we can use for that. And then, of course, there's people out there struggling with infertility, trying to get pregnant. And so they're very interested in optimizing their hormones. And many people are finding out they have PCOS. So there are specific tests for that, which we're also going to talk about. But the key point here is we want to focus, number one, on the foundation. So we want to look and see how strong your foundation that you built for your house is before we go on to look at the contents of your house.
Ellen, sorry, can we just go back to the previous slide? Just want to add one thing about this. And also, many of you are saying that you can't hear or see the slides. There's nothing I can do right now, but what you can do is try to get on Chrome. That seems to be the browser that works the best. Now, about this slide, the reason why we went with this approach is I want to give you an example, just like something that I think every one of you can imagine. A year ago, I bought this beautiful house here in Rocky Mountains in Boulder, Colorado, and it's a house that's perched on the side of the hill. And, I got its amazing view. It's a beautiful house. It's a quirky house, but nevertheless amazing. Now, the first thing that I did was I invited an engineer to come and help me look at the foundation of the house. Why? Because the house itself would be pretty useless if the foundation wasn't strong. And I'm sure you can relate to this. And so with the hormones, what's interesting is that hormones is typically the last thing that fails. There's a lot of different deficiencies and inflammation or excesses that happen for years before we get into having thyroid problems or estrogen dominance or develop terrible perimenopause and menopausal symptoms. And that's the reason why we urge you to look at the hormonal foundation as the starting point of testing. And that's why you see the number one there. That's where you're going to start, because this is really where a lot of the things go wrong for years before your hormones manifest. So I really want to invite you to stay with us on this one and hear us out. What is the hormonal foundation? What are the tests that you can order there, which are very inexpensive? We created a lab panel for you in a way that is very affordable and is going to show you a ton about what's going on in your body. All right, I'm done, Alan.
Okay, all right, that was very good, very good. So yeah, the idea here is this foundation that we're looking at is really based on 4 pillars, and that is, as you mentioned, inflammation, and of course we have to think about metabolism, nutrients, and core tests. All these are very important. I just want to kind of go through each one of these and talk about some critical tests. First of all, let's talk about the core tests. The core test that we really want to know is we want to know your CMP. Now, what is this? It's called Comprehensive Metabolic Panel. This is a super valuable test because it will tell us the function of your liver and kidney and protein stores in your liver. And then also is really good for measuring inflammation in your liver. So if you have elevated liver enzymes, we'll be concerned about that. The liver is very, very important when it comes to the body. In fact, we can't live without our livers. The liver is the main detoxifier of the body, so it's going to take the poisons and remove them from the body, and it really produces tons of proteins that will transport your sex hormones. The kidney is really important because it excretes all these hormone disrupting toxins that we're exposed to. So if you think about it this way, every single day, particularly if you live next to a golf course, or maybe you live next to a farm or so, your exposure to toxins may be significant, and you really need to have a very healthy liver and a very healthy kidney in order to get rid of these things. And that's how important it is to measure these things, and it's super helpful. Now, what is a CBC? Well, that's a complete blood count, and it also is considered a core test because it measures your ability to carry oxygen in your body. And so it's going to screen you for anemia. And of course, people may feel terrible, but if they think it's just automatically jumped to their hormones, they may miss the anemia that's going on that's causing them to feel low energy and tired and poor endurance. So, and there's a lot of different things that we can see on the blood count, but it really measures the health of your bone marrow and your ability to create various cells. And by the way, it also measures what's called a white blood cell count. And this little girl sticks in my mind every time I talk about a CBC. She came into the ER. She was about 6 years old, and her parents said, she just has low energy. It's just not herself. She's 6 years old. She's not really playing like all the other kids her age, and we're concerned about her. So I did some of these core tests, and on her CBC, her white blood cell count came back at 50. So that's stands for 50,000, and normal should be less than 12. Well, at 50,000, she of course had leukemia. And so she was feeling terrible because she had cancer. So we don't want to miss other things that can have us feel terrible, whether it's leukemia or anemia, or maybe we're having, liver problems or kidney problems. These are life-altering, potentially life-threatening conditions, and we absolutely have to know about these things. And so I consider them to be core tests. Now, do you want to comment on any of this, Magdalena, that I just talked about? Are there any questions about these two before I move on?
Sorry, I was muted. No, I think it's all good.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then the other one I want to talk about in the foundation is inflammation. And this is really, really interesting because while the other two tests, your CBC and your comprehensive metabolic panel, are commonly done by your doctor, these are two biomarkers that are not done by your doctor commonly. And homocysteine, in fact, isn't even covered by insurance and ends up being kind of an expensive test. But I'm gonna really talk to you about why it's important to check these two biomarkers. The first one is CRP, and it measures inflammation. Now, inflammation in our body is a normal process. It's how we heal from injury and so on. But if you're at your baseline and you feel at your baseline, you haven't had any recent illnesses or injury, it's a great time to check your high sensitivity CRP. If this number is less than 1, it's considered optimal and you don't have any inflammation. However, if it's above 2.0, it's a completely independent risk factor for early cardiovascular disease. So it's very concerning. Now, how does inflammation relate to hormones? Well, inflammation can prevent weight loss. Of course, the higher your CRP is, the stronger there is likely to have you're likely to have an autoimmune condition. We do not like chronic inflammation. Of course, it can disrupt hormone production, and we see hot flashes occur more frequently in women that are perimenopausal or menopausal. And then, of course, inflammation really is a sign of the liver struggling and the liver's having problems. And this is, of course, also important when it comes to the hormone receptors themselves. CRP is such a valuable biomarker because we do know that if it's optimal, less than 1, that's great. You have no evidence of chronic inflammation. We truly believe that inflammation is the root cause of all chronic disease. So I always encourage people at least once a year to get a high sensitivity CRP done. Now, homocysteine, this is also what I consider to be an inflammatory marker. It's actually an amino acid, And what we found is that people who have higher levels of homocysteine have problems with cognitive decline. In fact, if we were measure homocysteine and we're elevated, some studies have suggested that if we put you through a bunch of cognitive tests, you're going to function 3 to 5 years behind your peers if you have elevated homocysteine for a long period of time. It usually indicates disruption of your methylation pathway. And so you may say, okay, what is methylation? Well, methylation is really where we take one little substance in our body and we create it into another. And our body has to be very adaptable, right? We're exposed to lots of things. We have to make lots of things very quickly. And so we do this trillions of times per second in our body. And just imagine if we have a little bit of trouble doing that. And that's really what the methylation pathway is all about. So when you have a higher level of homocysteine, it usually signals you have a problem with methylation, and then of course that can increase your risk for cognitive decline of all types, not just Alzheimer's. Interestingly enough, we first learned about homocysteine from actually little kids. They were born, we'd measure their homocysteine and it would be quite high. We really like to see a less than 10, but these kids would have numbers above 100. And we followed them out over a couple decades and found that almost all of them died in their 20s. And very rare was it for them to live past the age of 30. Guess what they died from? They died from advanced cardiovascular disease. And this is how we realized that higher levels of homocysteine were associated with cardiovascular disease. As it relates to methylation, if we have trouble with our DNA and trouble replicating our DNA, we can run into all kinds of problems. So it's no wonder there is a strong association with brain function. And so, again, these are considered to be key foundational markers for us to measure. And unfortunately, these markers are rarely measured in clinical practice. And let me just tell you a little bit about doctors. We tend not to measure things we don't understand. And we're not really taught about these particular biomarkers. But when it comes to integrative or functional medicine, these are biomarkers we like to think about a lot. And we like to lower them because the treatment for this is almost always natural. All right, so if there aren't any questions on that one, I want to move on to metabolism.
Um,
And
Dr. Allen, I think what's happening is that the slides have paused and I'm getting a spinning circle on my end. Would
oh,
you
okay,
mind just taking off the sharing of slides and then
sure,
do it one more time and see what happens?
yeah.
I'm wondering whether you guys also had a pause on the slides. All right, let's do this again.
All right, so we can try it again. Do you want me to try to share them again?
Well, they say they're all interesting. All right, well, now we're having 100 comments saying it's all working for them.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, now
Right, I should have said nothing, but I couldn't see anything you were saying. So
okay, all right. So let me get down to where we were.
yeah.
Okay. So, and guys, I will take plenty of questions at the end too. So don't feel badly if you're asking a question we haven't gotten to you. Um, so the idea is that again, we're talking about the foundation biomarkers. So far we've talked about the core tests. Remember your liver, kidney, electrolytes, protein stores, and so on. And then we moved on to inflammation. Now we're talking about metabolism. And of course, metabolism is something that your doctor probably has checked your glucose at some point, and maybe even your A1C. And so, just to sort of tell you the difference, the glucose is the measurement on that particular day of what your blood sugar is. And this is why we always want you fasting, is because we don't know if you went to Dairy Queen or whatever and had a blizzard, and if we checked your glucose, we think you have diabetes. But the reality of it is that you just took a bunch of carbs. So fasting glucose is most helpful. Hemoglobin A1C is a 3-month measurement of glucose. And so then we also rarely check, and again, this is not checked often, but should be checked all the time, is fasting insulin. Now, first of all, let's talk about glucose. So the issue is that if you have high glucose and a high 3-month measurement of glucose, the A1C, you really have an increased risk for developing certain types of cancers, and you almost always will have elevation of your high sensitivity CRP because of the metabolic disturbance of either the prediabetes or diabetes. But there is something that we see even before the glucose and the A1C go up, and that's the insulin. We see the insulin start going high. And for many women out there, this is the leading cause of PCOS. the polycystic ovary syndrome. You don't really need to have cysts on your ovaries to get this diagnosis. What you really need to have is higher levels of insulin in your body, disrupting the hormones coming from the brain that are signaling your ovaries to take cholesterol and chop it up into estrogen. Because of this disruption, they begin making testosterone instead of estrogen, and so you really get out of balance with higher levels of testosterone. So the problem is if you have high levels of insulin, it's a big time fat fertilizer. So it makes it really hard to lose weight. So if I'm looking at my patients and I'm trying to get them to lose weight, I measure an insulin because I want to make sure they don't have this insulin problem. Now, I want to talk about some signs. So if you're out there wondering, hey, should I be worried about blood sugar? You can have both high blood sugar and you can have inappropriately low blood sugar. And they do have different symptoms. Of course, if the blood sugar is high enough, you can be thirsty all the time. And this is because if your glucose gets high enough in your blood and is filtered in your kidneys start to dump that glucose, which causes you to dump a bunch of free water. So it causes you to feel thirsty and you get dehydrated. So you're going to be urinating all the time. You're going to be thirsty all the time. Your vision actually may get blurred because of the glucose bound to the protein in the back of the eye. And you may experience extreme fatigue. Why? Because you're walking around dehydrated all the time. And so you're feeling bad. Now, if your blood sugar is low, you may have some symptoms that you may think are related to hormones, but it's actually low blood sugar. And that feeling anxious and shaky, maybe sweaty, moody, lack of focus, these are all things that we see in women that have hormone problems. But if we don't measure blood sugars and we don't pick up on the fact that they're having blood sugar issues, we're going to really miss the actual cause for them feeling bad. And of course, if you're a cycling woman, we talked about PCOS. And of course, if you have higher levels of testosterone, you can get the acne and the irritability and so on and hair loss. I see tremendous trouble with weight loss when you have very high levels of insulin. So again, we're talking about a sugar problem causing us to produce high levels of insulin, which is causing us to have trouble losing weight and so on. So postmenopausal women, of course, they will struggle with belly fat. Many of us will struggle with belly fat. I personally have struggled with belly fat. It's just something that happens as we get older, right? Over time, the tendency is for our blood sugars to increase. But if you really want to know the best test to intercept the blood sugar problem, that's checking the fasting insulin. And so I love for people to look at that as a foundational test. And because most doctors won't measure it, most people don't know that they actually are suffering from this thing called insulin resistant syndrome. Uh,
Can we just go back to the previous slide,
sure.
Dr. Allen? One of the things, I think one of the biggest, the most frequent emails we get from women, because a lot of our following is the perimenopausal, menopausal ladies, is belly fat. Like, how come, I've always been a thin person and I've been hitting perimenopause, menopause, and suddenly my belly fat is there like it wasn't before. And I really like what you said just now about insulin being feeding fat cells.
Yeah, I mean, and again, this is sort of an aging issue. Over time, our body tends to have trouble with sugar. Diabetes used to be one of these things we wouldn't really see until you were 60, 70 years old. Now we're starting to see it in people in their 20s, and it's really because we're all eating terrible. But as we age, if we really want to intercept it and we really want to stop the weight gain and intercept the belly fat, we've got to make sure that people don't have high levels of insulin
Yeah,
because
and
their
this is
glucose may be normal and
yeah,
their A1C
absolutely.
may be normal,
Mm.
but the insulin is high and it's telling us to store belly fat,
And
and
this is
that's
the
bad.
reason, right? And this is the reason why we put sugar markers into sugar level markers into the foundation's lab work, right? Because one of the things that I see a lot, and this was a big awakening for me moving to the United States and being not being from here. It was a realization how much sugar there was in everything that we eat in the US, how sweet everything is, and how much sugar people consume on a daily basis without realizing it,
Yeah.
including healthy foods, right? Supposedly. And so don't dismiss it like, saying right away, well, my doctor says I'm not diabetic, so like everything is clear. You don't need to be diabetic. You can be pre-diabetic and still be having a lot of these symptoms and having blood sugar levels too high for your body to function properly. So really, really important marker to get tested as well.
Yeah, and I'm really talking about not only diabetes and prediabetes, but there's something that we see even before your blood sugar starts to go up into that pre-diabetic range, and that's the insulin that's going high. And this is a very primary reason why people have trouble losing weight, and they start packing on the weight, which makes everything worse. And like you said, just to give you a perspective on the United States, the average American is consuming 150 to 200 grams of processed sugar every day, and not even realizing it. The World Health Organization tells us that a healthy person should consume more than 25 grams of processed sugar per day.
So let's
So
just
again,
convert that into teaspoons. So when you say 150 grams, that's basically like about 24, 25 teaspoons of sugar.
yes,
Yeah, because
yes.
4 grams is 1 teaspoon, just to kind of like let you visualize it.
And we're not talking about any fruits here when we talk about limiting sugar. We're just talking about processed food. So it's that person who reaches for the ketchup and doesn't realize there's 5 grams of high fructose corn syrup in it, takes a bunch of squeezes on the ketchup. So it's like you said, hidden sugars are everywhere. And then there, of course, there's the obvious sugars, but we're not really looking for them. I mentioned, I think, Dairy Queen earlier. If you order a Blizzard, just a regular size Blizzard is about 140 grams of sugar. Okay, so it's really easy to exceed 25 grams per day, and it's really easy to have problems with insulin and to overwork your pancreas. And then, of course, and that's when we start having trouble, right? So we start gaining weight, and it's just a horrible cycle because everything gets worse.
Yep.
All right. So just kind of talk just briefly about these. So ideally, if you had your insulin levels done and your glucose was normal and your A1C, the 3-month measurement of your blood sugar was normal, I would really like to see you have low levels of insulin. Less than 2 is considered optimal. Once it creeps above 8, you might start having trouble. Above 12, we start thinking you got insulin resistance syndrome. And there's some very, very good things for you to do immediately to reverse that. And it really is so much easier to reverse if we see insulin resistance syndrome before we see a problem with blood sugars. Now, if your blood sugar is 70 to 85, I consider that to be optimal. Less than 100 is considered normal, right? So if you're less than 100, your doctor is probably going to say, "Hey, that's great," which might be okay if your insulin was checked and was normal. But if your insulin, say, is like 20, but your doctor doesn't know that, you're much more likely to pack on weight, particularly belly fat, and ultimately run into blood sugar problems. So the idea here is that if your blood sugar is 100 to 125, that's prediabetes. And again, these aren't my numbers; these are from the American Diabetes Association. If it's above 125, that's consistent with diabetes. And here's the thing, really important for all of you to know out there. If you have a mom with diabetes, you're super high risk. If you have a father with diabetes and a mother, you're very, very high risk. So again, there's a genetic component, but nowadays we're seeing kids, I call them kids because they're in their 20s, develop diabetes, at the age of 20, say 26, that both parents, in fact, nobody in the family, when we do a family history, nobody has diabetes. It's just we're all eating way too many carbs. And so the idea is we're going to cut back to less than 25 grams per day to try to help control this. If you do have prediabetes, all is not lost, but do understand you are at increased risk for developing cancer and to have a heart attack. And it's because the blood sugar will literally change the way you make your cholesterol molecules. You'll make more small, dense molecules that will clog your arteries. And it gets worse if you become a diabetic. By the time a person is diagnosed with diabetes, they've lost 50% of the volume of their pancreas and about 80% of the function. So it's really, really important to intercept this as soon as possible. So if you're out there and you've recently become struggling with your weight, you've been struggling for some time, and you've been told that your glucose and A1C are normal, but no one's ever checked an insulin, I always recommend that people do. And if it's high, that might be your culprit there. Again, a foundational test, okay? Really important to think about these things. Hemoglobin A1C, of course, the 3-month measurement of blood sugar, I consider less than 5.4% optimal. 5.7% is normal. 5.7 to 6.4 is considered to be prediabetes, and greater than 6.5% or equal to is diabetes. Again, these are American Diabetes Association numbers. I do have people get hemoglobin A1C mixed up with hemoglobin. And so some people will say, hey, the hemoglobin A1C is 5, you're going to die because you don't have enough red blood cells. Remember, they're two completely different measurements. One's hemoglobin, which transports your oxygen. The other one's hemoglobin A1C, which is a measurement of the percent of your red blood cells that have a glucose molecule attached to them. So again, two completely different numbers there. So again, I think we sort of talked about this. The insulin resistance is really, so we see a lot of weight loss issues, especially after menopause. The blood testing will show us high insulin levels, but we may or may not have yet developed problems with our blood sugars, because remember, we're going to see the insulin first. Once you develop diabetes, you ultimately can't make any more insulin. You just sort of wear out, and this is why people's blood sugars go from 115, that pre-diabetic range, 3 or 400 overnight, is because enough of their pancreas has finally died that it cannot no longer produce enough insulin. So if you measure a person who has diabetes, if you measure their insulin levels will sometimes be very low. And that sometimes is expected with pancreatic burnout. So if you're somebody who wonders, maybe you have diabetes and you wonder, is my pancreas still working at all? You check an insulin, and if you're able to make insulin, it's working still. If you're not making much, then it's not working, and you're eventually going to have to go on insulin. Which, unfortunately, once you start going on insulin, the first thing that happens in the first 30 days, you start packing on weight. You'll probably put on 20 or 30 pounds. Most people do. And remember, insulin's a fat fertilizer. So you're giving yourself these injections, and your insulin's all over the place, and it's getting super therapeutic or too high. So the idea is that if we can improve insulin and improving blood sugar control, we actually may improve some of the symptoms you're having. You may have less hot flashes. Certainly, if we can reverse prediabetes, even diabetes, if we can reverse insulin resistance syndrome, we can actually lower inflammation. Most people that have sugar problems have elevated HSCRP, that inflammatory marker I talked about. And so what we'll do is, as we help out the pancreas and get that blood sugar to come down, will also help that chronic inflammation. And what does this do for your hormones? Well, it improves the hormone receptor function. So it's all kind of cool if we're looking at the foundation. So again, foundation is really important. Insulin resistance, really the number one cause of PCOS. If we do blood testing, we'll see high levels of insulin, high levels of testosterone. And if we measure releasing hormones from the brain, they'll be coming out in abnormal levels. Okay, the last test category that I want to talk about is nutrients. And Magdalena, you know how important this is, because I've talked about this. Nutrients are key in the way that they impact hormones. And so the things I like to look at are vitamin D. 70% of people are deficient in. Vitamin B12, because it's really important in the methylation pathway, and energy production. So if you have lower levels of B12, you tend to have issues with feeling, tired and fatigued, and it can be problematic for your thyroid. Ferritin and iron. Many women out there suffer with very low levels of ferritin and low levels of iron. Why? Because they had heavy periods for many, many years, and these heavy cycles have left them depleted in iron. Why is that? Well, we take iron to build a red blood cell. So if you're going to lose red blood cells all the time, your body's constantly trying to rebuild these red blood cells. And if it's using up the iron, you're going to run low, and that's going to cause you to feel tired and fatigued, low energy, low endurance. And conversely, if we just happen to check it and it's super high, we start worrying about it being deposited in your organs, such as your liver. And remember, if it damages the organ that produces hormones, we're going to have trouble. And we see this with the pancreas. We see that people who have super high levels of iron can deposit that iron inside the pancreas, and that can lead to diabetes. And we would never really know that unless we measured this test. Now, a story comes out for me in this one as well, is that my grandma, she was 76 when she was finally diagnosed with hemochromatosis, which is very high levels of iron. Her ferritin was above 500. Ideally, you really want to have it around 100 or so, or a little bit more, 100 to 200. But her number was, above 500. She, for many years, had been depositing iron in her liver and her other organs, and she ultimately went into the hospital with complete liver failure. And one of the doctors checked her ferritin, and it ended up being super, super high. I remember that I was in medical school at the time, and I just remember how tragic it was when he explained the situation that was genetic and that it was overabsorption of iron and it could have been addressed many, many years ago. And unfortunately, she ended up passing away from that within a couple of weeks. And so you don't have to have that happen to you because now the testing is available. It's a screening test. If you have high levels of ferritin, you don't really have any symptoms, so you wouldn't really know. If you have very low levels of ferritin, you may have low energy and low endurance. And these are super key things. Now, vitamin D, I love to check for vitamin D. Aetna just sent me a letter and said they're no longer going to pay for vitamin D for preventative testing, which I think is crazy, but I understand why they're doing it. It's because more and more doctors are actually ordering vitamin D now. The psychologists are ordering it because we're finding that people who have high levels of vitamin D are less likely to have a neuropsychiatric breakthrough. Neurologists are ordering it more and more because we found that people who have optimal levels of vitamin D have less issues with their seizures, so less frequency of their seizures. We also think vitamin D improves insulin function or insulin sensitivity. So if you have high levels of insulin, wouldn't it be great to take plenty of vitamin D and to really get in that range, which is impactful and can really help you? And so I really like vitamin D. There's a super strong association with less autoimmune disease too. And we know that it's helpful to take vitamin D because it absorbs calcium, which can build your bones, particularly as you're going through menopause. Great data around cancer prevention and lower blood pressure too, by the way. So vitamin D is kind of the big bang for the buck vitamin now that insurance companies are denying routinely on blood testing. I think it's a core nutrient, and it's really functions more like a hormone. So
I would also add to this. One of the essential things about vitamin D is the conversion of the T4 hormone to T3.
absolutely, yes,
So many of you who are, for example, here on Synthroid, which is a synthetic version of T4, you're dependent on a number of different factors. The ability of converting to T3, which is your working horse, that's what the receptors take in for your beautiful hair, good energy, being able to convert fat to energy, good brain function, right? All the things that thyroid hormones are responsible for, but the conversion happens in the gut and the liver, and vitamin D is one of the facilitators. So that's another thing to look at.
absolutely. And then just to address magnesium fairly quickly, it's thought that about 80% of people are deficient in magnesium.
Oh my God.
Um,
Yes.
yeah, so if you have lower levels of magnesium, you can have all kinds of symptoms, including constipation and many others. So it's really important to get all of these nutrients, tested and really to target those areas that you want to optimize. And again, I'm not just talking about being deficient. What I teach is optimization. So I have people that, they're feeling pretty good, but they want to feel great. Okay. And we're going to teach them exactly where they need to be with their optimal numbers, particularly when it comes to nutrients, because these are pretty easy to get into the optimal range once we actually measure them. So I always say test, don't guess when it comes to nutrients. You can really save yourself a lot of money. You don't need to buy a bunch of nutraceuticals that aren't working. You can buy the things that your blood work says that you need. Really, really helpful. All right. So are you ready, Magdalena, to move to the next step in
Yes,
this?
let's do this. I think we're doing thyroid next, right?
Yes. Yeah. So the idea here is that, once we've completed our foundation and we know that, inflammation is good, we know the fasting insulin is good, we know that we have a great functioning liver and kidney, and we don't have to worry about that. We're able to make proteins and good electrolytes. Once we have that foundation of nutrients, then we sort of move on. And so, first of all, we're going to focus in on thyroid. And in order to understand hormones before we move on to the next level, is I want to talk about the best ways to measure these various tests. So if we're going to be looking at hormone testing, we can do it all kinds of ways, right? So we can measure blood, we can do urine testing, we can do saliva testing. Now, I'm just going to tell you what I like. So I think the best way, and really the only way to measure hormones from your thyroid is blood testing. And the blood tests are very simple. We're going to talk a little bit about them. Again, most doctors will just check one test called TSH, and I'm going to tell you why I don't think it's enough. What about female hormones, though? If we're looking for sex hormones or so on, what are we going to be looking for? Well, in 2006, this company called Precision Analytical came out with this new method of testing, and it was testing your urine. And so you would test it over a period of a day. and you would give 4 or 5 samples. And we're going to dive a little bit more into Dutch in a bit. But most integrative doctors and integrative practitioners feel like Dutch gives you the biggest bang for the buck. And I like to do Dutch Complete, which is a very comprehensive Dutch test that not only includes the sex hormones and their metabolites, but it measures other things too that we're going to get into: neurotransmitters, nutrient metabolites, and so on, and cortisol. Cortisol can be measured not only in your urine, but it can also be measured in saliva, through swabs. I also do a morning cortisol just as a blood test. I find it very helpful because cortisol should be super high in the morning, nice and high, like 15 to 20 in their blood reference range. And then in the evening time, it should drop down to around 2 to 5. But so I know that first thing in the morning, I need to have a nice, high, healthy level. And for most people that come and see me, I see a very low level in the morning. And that really indicates to me that we've got a major issue with their sleep. So that either their sleep architecture is poor, or maybe they have obstructive sleep apnea that nobody has caught. And so I do like to think about cortisol testing. And the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to adrenal hormones and female hormones, in my mind, is going to be Dutch testing, because it will pick up the same thing that the AM cortisol blood test will pick up. All right, so I want to focus in on the thyroid. We have many women that are listening here, maybe all women, I don't know, but thyroid is super important for women, and the reason why is because we see thyroid disease about 10 times more than we in women than we see in men. So if you're a woman, you almost have to be kind of paranoid that you're going to develop thyroid disease at some point. Over 20 million women out there have thyroid disease, so it's quite common, and it comes with all kinds of symptoms, right? Many of you who have had thyroid issues can relate to these symptoms. If you have low thyroid, you might complain of weight gain and fatigue, maybe foggy thinking. Maybe you were diagnosed with depression. Some doctor put you on an antidepressant without checking your thyroid. Maybe you've had some hair loss, or maybe you're having some thinning hair, the anxiety, the brittle nails, feeling cold all the time. Maybe you're having issues with infertility, frequent miscarriages, and so on, and nobody's really ever checked your thyroid. Now, if your thyroid's too high, you can have similar symptoms. You can have fatigue and anxiety and weight loss or weight gain, but you can have more like racing heart with palpitations and so on, sweaty hands, irritability, those kind of things. So a lot of symptoms, right, for the thyroid, and most doctors just want to check one test called the TSH. Okay, now why am I showing you Lisa here? Well, I'm showing you Lisa because two doctors fairly recently wrote an article about why they think that she had hypothyroidism. And so I want you just to kind of look at this picture, and I'm going to go over the clinical physical things that we see. So in hypothyroidism, or low functioning thyroid, you get the absence of the lateral third of the eyebrow. So she doesn't really have much of the lateral third of her eyebrow. She has kind of thin, coarse, dry hair, which is another sign. She has a very weak smile. We call that weak facies. She also has maybe a prominence of the anterior or front part of her neck. That might be a goiter. And then, of course, you notice that she's wearing like this little coat, and they're indoors. I assume they're indoors there. She's wearing a coat, so that's cold intolerance. Okay. She's not tolerating the cold. And then her hands are kind of puffy, a little edematous on the dorsal or backside of the hands. These are all physical findings that we will see with hypothyroidism. Well, times have changed. Back then, it was due to iodine deficiency. Now we tend to have plenty of iodine around. So we suffer from way more autoimmune disease. That's the number one cause of hypothyroidism here in the United States. So here's what you need to know. I'm just going to tell you the take home. When your doctor just orders a TSH, it's not enough. And they might actually order a TSH and a free T4. So if you're out there and you're taking Synthroid or levothyroxine for thyroid replacement, and your doctor's only looking at T4, he's really only measuring the Synthroid. He's not actually measuring the active thyroid hormone. 80% of what your thyroid actually makes is T4, and the thyroid only makes 20% T3. And so you may say, why is that? If T3 is the active form, why am I making so much inactive? It's because our body's smart. It can always take the T4 and either store it or create it or convert it into the active form. Now, we told you that it's really important to get a foundation, like the foundation panel. Those biomarkers are critical because we find that people who have high levels of insulin will have trouble converting that T4 into T3. People that have low levels of vitamin D will have trouble converting T4 into T3. So there are many things that can interfere. Inflammation can interfere with the conversion of T4 into T3. So how would you know if no one ever checks T3? So even if you're having thyroid replacement and you're put on Synthroid, which is T4 only, and they don't measure T3, you may not actually be feeling good because your body's not converting well. And by the way, even if all your nutrients and everything looks good, you don't have insulin resistance and you don't have inflammation and your foundation panel is normal, 15% of the population just has trouble with that conversion normally. So they just may be a slower converter. They may have a little bit of, they may struggle with it. So for us, it's pretty critical as integrative practitioners to really look at T3 because it's the active thyroid hormone. Now, antibodies. I want to talk a little bit about antibodies. It's really Hashimoto's is one of the most under and misdiagnosed conditions that we have here in the US. And I'm telling you, because again, over 20 million people with thyroid problems, many of them have Hashimoto's. Who is Hashimoto? Well, Hashimoto is actually a guy at the age of 31. He wrote a paper about everything he was seeing inside the thyroid glands that he had taken biopsies from of women that had all these complaints, all these symptoms. And this was 1912. 10 years after he wrote the paper, the term, the diagnosis was made after him. So they started calling this disease Hashimoto's disease. And Hashimoto's disease is simply an autoimmune attack where your body decides to attack the thyroid gland. And we see it very commonly. Having direct access testing, I do get feedback from time to time from patients, either that they, for clients that went through, either that we saved them a bunch of money, that's a very common thing, or they'll tell me, hey, look, I want you to hear my story, keep doing what you're doing. So this person had come through and their doctor had told them they'd been online reading about hypothyroidism because they felt like they had all the symptoms of it. So they went to their doctor, begged and pleaded for thyroid tests, and had a TSH done. And their TSH was 4, just inside the reference range. And so they came onto our direct access lab platform and they said, you know what, I've been reading, Googling, I'm just going to order this thyroid panel and I'm going to look at my antibodies and I'm going to measure my active thyroid hormone. And we're going to see what the results are. So I'm going to tell you my integrative approach just quickly. TSH is thyroid stimulating hormone. It's coming from your brain. My optimal levels are 0.4 to 2.0. So already my ears are kind of perked thinking there's something wrong here. The T4, really, I like to see above 1. Free T3, the active form, I like to see that at least above 3. And then, of course, I don't want to find any antibodies because antibodies means that there's an autoimmune attack going on. So this person, came in, had the positive antibodies, and then had known that she might have Hashimoto's. So she went back to her doctor and said, "Do I have Hashimoto's?" Because blood tests seemed to suggest that. And sure enough, she finally got the treatment that she needed to feel great. And that's really what it's all about, right? It's about empowering people to actually take control of their health and take ownership of it. Really, we always get better outcomes when we have ownership of something. So that's the lesson I learned on thyroid.
I want to add something here. If we can just go back to the thyroid labs, obviously thyroid is very close to my heart because of my own history of Hashimoto's. And one of the interesting things is that I was showing completely normal TSH, even within your functional range, Dr. Allen, right? So I had I think 1.5 at that point. And then the free T and even free T, both 3 T4 and T3 were perfectly normal, and it was the antibodies that were super high. And no wonder I was so highly symptomatic. This is in 2008 when I was diagnosed. I was really lucky to be diagnosed really quickly. But this just really goes to say how misleading and how inaccurate and inadequate is it to just measure TSH alone.
Right. And it's kind of like the same story as insulin, right? So doctors aren't really checking fasting insulin like they should. The same thing goes with these antibodies. We will see the antibodies elevate 3 to 5 years before we see any issues with TSH, T3, or T4. So you could literally have this autoimmune condition going on for years and years. Nobody would know about it because usually they're just doing a TSH, but maybe they went the extra mile and they checked T4 and T3. All would continue to be normal for years, even while the attack is going on.
Yeah.
And so that sounds like that was your story. You clearly, were one of these people that had normal TSH and the thyroid hormones, and went the extra distance and had the antibodies done.
And also, just one more thing on this one is, pay attention to the word free and not total. A lot of the time, you have a doctor testing for total T4 or total T3, and that's not what we want to see. What we want to see is the word free in it, right? So
Yes, yeah.
you're testing on your own. If you're going with our labs, you don't need to worry about it, because that's exactly, we're going to be covering exactly this, is the free. Because free, that's what's bioavailable for your body to actually use, the cells to uptake. Total is bound and unbound, bound and free, and you just don't know how much of it is free.
Yeah, that's the frustration when we try to measure total. Is it's very up and down depending on the protein levels at the time, and these protein levels will change, whereas the free will not. So much more stable measurement. All right. So the next step, when you look at, you have the foundation in place, so you know that there's no inflammation, there's no sugar problems or insulin resistance. You know your nutrients are optimized, and you're ready to move on. Maybe you've checked your thyroid previously, or maybe you're going to monitor it every year. I always recommend that women do it at least once a year with the antibodies and so on. Our next real step then would be Dutch testing, okay? Because Dutch testing is very comprehensive, and it will look at all kinds of things. Just to show you, this is what it looks like. It's a kit that you receive in the mail. So everything else that we've been talking about up until this point has been blood testing. And so now we're talking about a kit where you go in, you order this, and it gets shipped to your house. Then on your leisure, you pick a day. For many women that are cycling, it's day 19 to 22. That's when we see the highest levels of the progesterone and estrogen together. And then you'll pee on these little strips 4 to 5 times. Not only are we going to measure all the sex hormones, but we're going to measure adrenal hormones. We're going to measure the cortisol and the cortisol metabolites. And then we're also going to measure a marker for oxidative stress. We're going to measure melatonin. So maybe you have sleeping problems or sleeping issues. That'll be helpful to know. And then neurotransmitter testing. So we're going to measure dopamine, some norepinephrine, epinephrine, and so on. So it's a very big bang for the buck test. It gives us a lot of data as practitioners. And so this is the way it's broken down. And it can be somewhat complicated, to read. So the idea here is that this is sort of the first page of the results, and they're going to be testing the main hormones, the estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. And then down to the left here is the cortisol pattern. So it really, in the black, it sort of shows you what the normal range it would be. It would be between low and high, so somewhere in there. And then it will show you in red, if you can see that, kind of what your range is. And so it's, again, this is a very typical pattern I see in most of my patients. In this example, I see somebody who has a very low waking cortisol, pretty low morning cortisol afternoon. And these people are almost always coffee addicts because coffee is the only thing that gets them through the day. So they drink a ton of coffee in the morning to get that caffeine boost, and then they move over to some type of, usually a diet soda with caffeine, to get them through the rest of the day. And then they have trouble sleeping, which causes the problem with the cortisol in the first place. So the idea here is that you get complete assessment of your cortisol and your metabolized cortisol. And then relative to women, very important to understand DHEA. It's kind of the feel-good hormone for women. DHEA it produces a lot of great feelings if it's at the right levels. And not to get too in depth, because we don't have a lot of time here, it measures the metabolism of your estrogens. And again, if you don't have that foundation in place, if you don't know that your liver function is normal at the time of your Dutch testing, what can end up happening is you can be really struggling to metabolize estrogen, which can increase your cancer risk. So again, getting that foundation in place is where we really want to be, and then we move on to really understanding the metabolism of how both our androgens and our estrogens are broken down.
Alan, can I just
Sure.
explain that a little bit here? I think one of the really key things you can see right in the middle here, the estrogen, which is E1. I don't know how well you guys can see this because it is a fairly packed slide. Is right in the middle when it says estrogen E1, and that is the hormone that's one of the types of estrogens that gets broken down to 3 different types of metabolites. How that gets broken down depends on how efficient and effective is your phase 1 liver detoxification, right? Which we can control vastly by changing our diet and using the right supplements. And for those of you who have done my estrogen reset program, you know all about that. And those metabolites are the 2, 4, and 16. The 2 is the right at the one at the bottom. That's the one that's protective. The 2 and the 16 are the ones that are problematic. As when I say problematic, they are the ones that are causing things like the growth of estrogenic cancers, like in the case of breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, thyroid cancer, but also things like fibroids, endometriosis, thyroid nodules, giving you terrible PMSs, right? So that's a function of those. And it's interesting also, like at the right at the bottom, that the 2-hydroxyestrone E1, that you see that the number 2 right there, and you see the arrow going to the left saying COMT and methylation. That's where your liver pathway, the phase 2 liver detoxification really kicks in, when that's really important. There's a whole bunch of things, again, nutritionally, that we can do to support methylation pathway in the liver, such as, for example, incorporating lots of beets, choline from eggs and avocados, a couple of different supplements like SAMe, but also B vitamins are hugely important in methylation. But you see the word COMT there as well. And that's an interesting one. For those of you who followed me for a while, you know that I've partnered up with a number of different people who do genetic analysis. And like, for example, in my case, 75% of my COMT gene is compromised. And so I'm unable to produce sufficient enzyme to code for being able to produce the 2-methyl E1 metabolite, which is highly protective, right? So, and it's not to say that's the end of the world. It's just to say that a lot of it is epigenetics, which means that changing our lifestyle, sleep patterns, detoxification, living a clean lifestyle, meditation can really, really improve all of those pathways. And I think that's one of the powerful things about Dutch that I really like, which saliva doesn't offer. Many of you have been, there's been this massive conversation going on here about saliva versus urine. And so that's one of it. That's a big one, is that saliva does not show you how your hormones are being broken down to specific metabolites. It shows you the E1, E2, E3 hormone. That's as far as it goes. It's not able to show you the metabolites. And I always felt, having done this for many years, that is the detail is in the metabolites. And if we can turn them on and off and manipulate them with the right nutrition, this is where your symptoms start disappearing. And that's really, really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the old way of doing things was more saliva. The new way of doing things for most integrative practitioners is Dutch testing. And we're seeing it gain more and more popularity. Unfortunately, it's considered experimental or investigational, since insurance companies don't want to pay for it. So it's not really mainstream, but I think it's becoming mainstream in functional medicine, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very much so. Sorry, I had to open get my dog back in. It's raining outside.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. And it really is a golden standard. A lot of functional medicine practitioners who really are in the top edge, space will definitely be switching to have already switched to urine testing. So that's why we're here talking about Dutch. If saliva was as good or better or even equally good, then I wouldn't mind talking about that at all, because in some ways it's easier, right? You just spit and send. But it's definitely a much better marker.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the more we use this, the more we understand it. I just think it's going to be sort of taken over the marketplace. More and more practitioners want this information. It comes with lots of other things that we sort of talked about. I won't be too long with this. The idea here, guys, is that when we're looking at the blood testing and potentially Dutch testing, we really want to start with that foundation piece, and we want to make sure that we have all those pieces working really, really well, because that's really what allows our hormones to work great. And so we always recommend, don't skip out on the foundation, because the foundation is key. And then once you get your foundation squared away and you understand it, you got everything optimized. Then that's when we are really able to use these others tests. Not saying that you can't do all at once. You certainly can. You'll have all that information. But the point is, we really have to work at fixing problems that we're going to find with the hormonal foundation. So what can we do? Well, this is sort of why I started a direct access business. a couple years ago, is because I really wanted a solution for people. I saw really high deductibles, less coinsurance for labs, and people skipping lab testing. And then more commonly, I saw doctors refusing to talk to their patients about what optimal was, what even normal was. They were just telling people that they were okay when they really weren't okay. And then the right tests weren't being done. Being an integrative doctor with a strong conventional background, I understood, where they were coming from, but yet we were missing out on a huge opportunity to intercept disease. And this is where, people like Magdalena, you've got a great community of very interested, very dialed in people, right? And being able to somehow help your community get access to this is super exciting for me personally, and being able to provide an education piece for them. So I just want to talk just about how you can take advantage of getting your own testing done through our company if you want to. And then I have a special offer just for your community, and it's a big time education offer too. So you might really like it. So how it works is that, let's say you wanted to order a foundation panel. What happens is you go online. If you're in those 46 states that we service and you have a nearby Quest Draw location, you order the test. Our physician who's licensed in that state will then sign off on your lab requisition. And then you'll go to a local Quest Diagnostics blood draw station and get your blood work drawn. If you ordered a Dutch test, what we do is we contact them, and we're going to pay for the shipping for that kit to get to you. And then they're going to give us the results, and then we're going to send those results back to you. You receive everything as an online lab report that's HIPAA protected, meaning your personal health information is protected. And just so you know, our physicians will review the tests. So if it turns out you do have acute kidney failure, or maybe you have liver failure or advanced liver disease, if there's anything that you need to take immediate action on, such as severe anemia, something like that, we're going to actually reach out to you. So one of our doctors will call you and say, hey, look, you need to go to the emergency room right away, or you need to get to your doctor right away and take care of this ASAP. We do this for things that need to be addressed immediately. So that's kind of how it works in the background. So what you need to know is it's called Your Lab Work. And so the key thing is there a Quest Draw station nearby if you ordered blood testing? Some people have ordered a test and they found it at Quest Draw stations an hour away, and then they get mad at us or whatever. Don't get mad at me. Just check. You can either Google Quest Diagnostics near you. If you're in New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Rhode Island, you're excluded. If you're from Canada, we don't service Canada. Now, I've talked to people before from Canada. They're like, no, send me a lab requisition. I want to take advantage of this, and I'm going to, be vacationing in Florida or whatever, and I'll get my blood work drawn then, even if it's 3 months down the line. The lab requisition, once you get it, is good for 3 months, by the way. And so you don't have to take immediate action on getting it drawn if you feel like this is something you want to take advantage of. So I want to talk about the special offer that we have for your community, Magdalena, is we put together the actual foundation panel that I recommend. And then, of course, we're talking about doing a comprehensive thyroid test with the antibodies, both of them, the thyroglobulin antibody and the thyroid peroxidase antibody, T4, T3, and TSH. And then, of course, for Dutch Complete. So until August 31st, we have this in place. But there's I forgot to say this. So what's the cost? So the Hormone Foundation with the coupon, with $30 coupon, is $295. And so you may say, what does that include? Well, it's everything that we had talked about there with our core testing, right? So we talked about the CBC and CMP. So we're going to be looking at your liver function, electrolytes, protein stores, and kidney function. We're going to be looking at metabolism. We're going to be checking fasting insulin. Your doctor's probably not doing it. We're going to also look for that A1C and glucose. Inflammation, we're going to be measuring homocysteine. We don't want you to have cognitive decline, and we don't want you to carry that risk for early stroke and heart attack. So we're going to also look at CRP. We have to look at inflammation. It's so key to hormones. And then, of course, nutrients. We're going to look at the all-important vitamin D. So important for many reasons that I talked about. We're going to make sure your ferritin's not super low where you need iron replacement. And we're going to make sure that your ferritin's not super high where you need to go donate blood. And we're going to try to intercept anybody that has hemochromatosis, that really high level of ferritin. And the other biomarkers as shown. So this is what we're recommending for people as a foundation. So these are absolute key for you. We also have the thyroid package, which include what we talked about, the thyroid antibodies, both the antibodies, the TSH, T4, and T3. I do recommend this for women at least once a year. And you really should screen yourself because, like Magdalena said, you'll see the antibodies pop up first, even 3 to 5 years before you see the others. The Dutch testing, you can get that for $3.99 through us. We just call the company, we arrange for the shipping and so forth, and then it'll look at estrogen dominance and, of course, the cortisol, adrenals. Great for PCOS and for women who are under bioidentical hormone replacement. Very, very helpful.
Can I just mention that we do have the order button right there this should show up on your screen, and that's one of the offers that we've negotiated with Dr. Allen and his companies to get for you guys to get, and I'm passing those on to you, the $30 off, and that's going to be valid until August 31st. And part of the reason why we are making it time-based is because we're going to be doing the live group lab review with Dr. Allen. We just set the date for the 2nd of October, which means that do it now, order it now to get the results on time so that when the review is due and the presentation is on, you can pull out your labs and then ask questions based on the labs and actually get a lot of meaning out of the labs. A lot of times we slack on things and go, well, I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it next week, and then you forget about it, right? So, I really want to urge you to do that. And it's even more important if you're deciding to go with Dutch, because Dutch, if you are premenopausal, you're still menstruating, right? You want to order your labs within like day 19 to 22 of your cycle, which basically means is in the middle of your luteal phase. Day 19 means is like from the time of your period, right? So it's 19 days after your period. If you're in menopause, it doesn't matter when. If you don't have your period, you can just do it anytime. But that's just like the additional consideration for you is that Dutch needs to be ordered. The kit is sent to you. You need to time it properly, especially if you're premenopausal, and then send it back to them. And it takes them about 2 weeks to get the results. So there is a time limit to this. And that's the reason why I really want to encourage you to take action now. And don't delay it. So the offer for $30, and this is for every one of the labs, whether you're doing the foundational one, that's $30 off. If you're doing the thyroid panels, $30 off. And if you're doing Dutch, then it's $30 off as well. So every one of them we offer. And if you're ordering all three, then it's basically $90 off for everything.
Yeah, and we have some special bonuses, right? And the bonus is I'm going to try to take you inside an integrative practice by coming back on October 2 and taking specific questions relative to your lab results. And this is really a great way to learn, and it's a great way to feel comfortable about your tests and being able to go back to your provider and ask some really great questions. The idea here is we're going to really learn from other people interacting. So to give you some more time frames, if you just order a thyroid test, those tests have a very quick turnaround from a couple of days or so to the other tests in the foundation panel can take maybe a week or so in total. Thyroid and the foundation are going to be about a week or so you could plan for, but the Dutch does take some time. And so if you're on the fence about Dutch and you kind of wondering, you want to have it done in time for October 2, do it now. So that we have that information. The other bonus, which I got really excited about, and I talked to Magdalena about this today, is I'm going to give you lifetime access to my Hormone Lab Masterclass. And I have to tell you guys, this is a huge value for me to give this away. We sell this thing for almost $500 right now, just this particular lab masterclass. We sell this online. And the reason why I wanted to do it is because I really felt like your community was yearning for more education and more information. And I really wanted to give you a lot of really good science-based information around each lab test. So we like to look at with hormones. And so I want to just take a second and just show you what this really means. You can still see my screen here, right? So let me get off this thing. So are you guys able to see this screen? Magdalena, can you see my screen? So
yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm inside the actual class itself. So the cool thing is that we introduce you to the various hormones and so on, and then what we're going to do is we're going to go very, very specific into each one of the tests. and then we're going to talk about the natural things that are available for you right now. And what I like about it is it gives you a real chance to get an education if you want. Like, let's look at the Dutch test in particular. So if we click on Dutch, Dutch can be somewhat complicated. So I go through, I talk a little bit about the history of Dutch. I talk about each one of the dials and how we look at the dials and so on. So I really try to make it easy for you to understand. And what really excites me is that this whole course is interactive. So if somebody actually goes through this, they can actually reach out to me and ask me a question at the very bottom of every category. So I'm going to show you, like, here's a comment, so some people will ask questions. It goes to my email, and then I can go and respond to it. It may take me a day or two to respond. Sometimes I have to research the questions because I don't know them. This class is updated, by the way. We do update it as new science comes out, new research, things that we're learning about. We try to put it there. I tried to put what I learned in the integrative and conventional practice and put it all in one place. And this is one of my 5 key pillars of aging called hormones. This particular class I'm going to gift to anyone who orders a test from Magdalena because I strongly believe in what you're doing, Magdalena, and the education you're providing, and I'm going to support that 100%.
Great. Yeah, we have questions coming in saying, so I just ordered it and that's it. Yeah, that's it. I mean, you just order. We'll send you instructions, right, on how to find quests.
Yeah, let me just kind of tell you. So once you order something, the everything that we do is manual, meaning that human beings don't do it, not the computer. The computer will send you a message that says, hey, your credit card went through, your order is being processed, and so on. But behind the scenes, there's really a team of human beings that are actually going to the various labs. They're either making phone calls and so on, or they're actually entering into the national systems the particular doctor that we need and the particular labs that you ordered. And then, so we tell you it will be 24 hours until you receive your lab requisition. So maybe you're somebody who ordered and you're a take action person. You're like, I'm going to go get my thyroid checked tomorrow morning. I would say hold your horses, possibly, but give us 24 hours to at least process your order and send you a lab requisition. If you have Gmail, really important, when we send lab requisitions, they're attachments. And so what ends up happening is it will go to your spam in your Gmail, sometimes hard to find. So if you have Gmail, be looking in your spam for an email from us with your lab requisition. Now, just to tell you a little bit more, when you order the test and we order it for you online with our doctor, what ends up happening is everything's done electronically. So you actually don't need a lab requisition. The problem is we started this business, about 10% of people who went to the blood draw station, there was some sort of problem because the phlebotomist that was drawing the blood didn't know, what our national account number was and so on. And we just ran into enough problems. We said, look, we're going to have a double protection, and that is for you to either print out or show on your phone your actual lab requisition. This is so nobody bills your insurance. You've already paid for this. You should not pay for it again. So nobody bills your insurance. All they're going to need from you is a driver's license just to verify you're the person they have. Everything's in their system already. And just in case they can't find it, you're handing them that lab requisition. So that's how it works. Hopefully I wasn't too verbose on it, but I do want people to understand that, sometimes people have these ideas that, they order and everything's done immediately. It takes a little bit of time to manually process these labs because we're working with various doctors and so on in various states.
Okay. Shall we go into the questions that came in? Are we good?
I'm gonna stop my sharing if I can figure out how to do that.
Many people do not see the Dutch testing available on the sales page. So let me pop in a URL that will enable you to see the Dutch testing. You can order it there. This is a ton of questions came in on that. Okay, so I just posted that link. Look at the chats, and then you will see a comment from me, which is right at the bottom. That should solve the problem. All right, so let's get into, for example, this was like early on. Diana Duggan is saying, really struggling with weight gain, acne since hysterectomy, regardless of diet and supplementation, struggling to raise low vitamin D and ferritin, thyroid issues. would I benefit from saliva or urine?
Yes. So again, first of all, I want to go back to the foundation testing.
Hmm.
Really, really important to get that foundation right. Now, some people will say, "Look, I'm just gonna check everything all at once," and that's fine. You'll have all that data together. But the truth is, it's very, very important for you to get your foundation right. And if you don't have all these foundational tests, I think that that's where you start. Again, number one, you got to check the foundation. Really key, okay? Because it's going to measure a lot of really key things that you could be having symptoms from.
Yeah, also struggling with raising vitamin D, it could be a whole combination of factors. It could be a genetic thing. Like, for example, I have a mutation for the VDR gene. And so I gotta spend a lot of time in the sun as well as supplement 10,000 units a day with vitamin D3, including summer. So it's kind of, there's a bit of nuance in all of this. And it also depends on what kind of vitamin D you're taking. So keep those questions on for October 2nd when you guys log in with specific issues. Yeah, so the benefit, definitely, to answer your question, the benefit is definitely I used to work with a lot of saliva testing in the past from a lab, and I stopped doing that because I just felt like the picture wasn't full with them. Patrice is
Yeah.
saying, to reduce insulin, is metformin the only option? And the answer is absolutely not.
Yeah. No,
uh,
I love to yeah, I love that question because obviously I've taken care of a lot of people with insulin resistance, and the natural thing, of course, is number one, look at the diet, and you really want to remember the 25-gram rule. If a person's a normal person in the U.S., they're at 150 to 200 grams. So you want to immediately move them down to less than 25 grams a day. Sometimes that's done through extreme dietary interventions. Sometimes it's done through food substitutions. That's the way I like to do it, is just teach people to look and just make a better choice. And if you do that, people tend to be happier over time instead of letting them and making them go into a completely different diet. The other thing that you can do that will really help with insulin will be to actually increase the muscle mass. So by changing your body composition, insulin becomes more sensitive. The more myocytes we have, the more muscle cells we have, the better insulin will function and the lower it will go. So we want to do resistance training, really
yeah,
important.
I
And
love
then
that.
and of
I
course, vitamin D, right? So we talk about vitamin D improving insulin sensitivity. We want to get that vitamin D above 60. So the reference range is very large. It's from 30 to 100. We really want to have people above 60. So we're in the range of 60 to 100.
Absolutely. And if you don't have my book, go and get it. It's on Amazon. It's called Cooking for Hormone Balance. There's a whole chapter on just how to rebalance your sugar blood levels. Yeah, I remember many years ago talking to Dr. Mark Hyman, who said that it's always with his protocol, he says that he can reverse insulin resistance within 2 weeks, right? You just have to do it right. And um, I find that starting off with the right kind of breakfast, and in my community, we call it a PFF kind of breakfast, protein, fat, and fiber rich breakfast. So no carbohydrates, no fruit, no, not oatmeal and fruit kind of a thing, not cereal, not bagels, but different kind of breakfast, and it's all in the recipe. If you look at my website, that's it's just I have found this is like once you start off with the right kind of breakfast, for the rest of the day you stop craving carbohydrates and sugar. It's pretty mesmerizing. Vanessa is saying, just FYI, glucose tests have different measurements in Canada versus US. That is true, Vanessa. And for those of you who are from Canada, I think what's really important for you to do is to find out what are the functional ranges. The same thing in the United States. It's like the stuff that you get from Quest or any other labs, they would give you labs that are the ranges that are not particularly for healthy people. You want to look at functional ranges. And then is that something, Dr. Allen, we're going to discuss on October 2nd, is functional ranges?
Yeah, actually, I gave them access to my lab masterclass to anybody that orders any test. Okay, so if they order
Yeah.
a foundations panel, they get it. If they just order a Dutch, they get it. If they just order a thyroid, they get it.
Okay.
And so in that lab masterclass, I do have optimal values for each one of the biomarkers,
Right.
and then I have natural ways for them to improve those particular biomarkers. So that's what I would love for them to take a look at that as they're looking at their lab results in preparation for our call. It will
Yeah.
be very, very helpful, and will form a baseline for them.
And then Sharon and Dory are both asking similar question: can a person get too much of vitamin B and B12?
Yeah, so I want to tell just a quick story on this so you'll remember it. So I had a person recently go to Amazon and they ordered cyanide. I didn't know you could order cyanide off Amazon, and he did it because he wanted to kill himself. So he got the cyanide, the potassium cyanide, and he took 2 scoops of it and then called the ambulance, and because he changed his mind. By the time he got to me, he was very sick. His heart rate was 190. He was diaphoretic. He had a really low blood pressure. Thought he was going to die. Well, guess what the treatment for that is? Super high dose vitamin B12. I gave him 5,000 times the dose that I recommend to everyone to take every day, which is a milligram. So I gave him 5,000 milligrams intravenously right there, and it saved his life. It bound to the cyanide and caused a cyanocobalamin complex, and he excreted out in his urine. So B vitamins are water soluble. So as long as your kidneys are working well, then you'll excrete out the excess B vitamins. So the problem that I see more likely is people are just too low. They're below what I consider optimal, which is above 700. And again, they're having problems with methylation. They might have a little bit high homocysteine and so on. And so I love to check and see what people's B12 is and then try to get them optimized. So for most people, B12 in and of itself, super duper safe with normal kidney function. Again, you have to have the foundation. This is why we talk about the foundation panel. We have so many people that are interested in hormones, right? And they want to get right to the hormones and skip over these really important things that interfere with hormones. And so rather than skipping over them, we talked a lot about getting that foundation in place for your health.
Foundy is asking, is a good question. He said to move to 25 grams a day to prevent insulin resistance. My question is 25 grams of what? Were you talking about sugar?
Yeah, absolutely. Sugar. Yeah.
So sugar, yeah. So it's a really great one because think of it that way. Like if you need to visualize it to 4 grams is 1 teaspoon. So this is about 5 teaspoons, 5 to 6 teaspoons. I like to work with 20 grams. So about 5 teaspoons, let's say, of sugar a day. And you might want to look at everything from added sugar as well as the sugar that's found in the food. And you'd be quite surprised how quickly it is you can start loading up a lot.
Yeah, I just want to say this, I talked to my kids about this years ago and I taught them the 25-gram rule. And, they're just looking at labels, looking for the one word sugar. They don't look for carbohydrates. They'll get confused. The numbers are too high. So just look for the word sugar and just see kind of as a baseline where you're at. If you're an average person, you're going to be more or less 150 to 200 grams a day. If you're eating a lot of, eating out, you're not really sure how much sugar in it, you can ask and find out how much sugar is there. But the idea is that you find out kind of where you're at on your baseline, and you'll probably be shocked to see how high you are. So that's the first thing we start with, and then we work towards getting them less than 25.
Yeah. And Ed is asking a good question. Can overseas participants order Dutch test and also receive the bonus for the master class?
Yeah, so we've had this question before, and we've actually called Dutch on this, and it turns out that there is a international fee that they charge of $30, and it has to be able to make it back through customs. So it's usually no problem getting out. I think the person asked us, they were from Spain, and so we called and checked on it. We can send it out, but we cannot guarantee that the United States is going to let it pass through customs. They tell us it works most of the time, but there's some people that don't. So if you're willing to, sort of take the chance, we do guarantee that your test will be done. So if you pay for the Dutch, obviously, and it gets stuck in customs where they don't perform it, they don't charge us. We're going to reverse the charges to you because we don't want to have you pay that. So I think Dutch works fine with that. We haven't had enough experience sending it overseas for me to feel super confident in our customs when the urine comes back.
Yeah, I think it should be pretty good because you're not sending any supplement, any liquids itself, because you spitting on a saliva is a piece of paper. So I'm hoping that's gonna be safe.
Yeah, and I would say the key thing about that is if you have any issues with that, just email us at support@yourlabwork.com to make sure that we get your address correctly. You'll notice on the checkout form when you guys try to order and check out, we always ask you what state you're in because that triggers what doctor we're going to get involved from our side, and then we need to know your address. And this is primarily for billing, but most importantly for any Dutch testing because it has to go to that address. So if your billing address is different than the address where you want your Dutch to go, or if you have an international place, please let us know at support@yourlabwork.com so that my team can reach out to you and make sure that it's going to go to the right place.
I love the personal attention you're offering. Laura is
That's because
asking,
I do employ my mother, and my mom is like super good.
are you
Like,
serious?
no, I offered her a little part-time work, 6 months ago, and it turns out she's the best employee that I've ever had.
Oh
And
my
so
God.
I'm just like, Mom, do you want to work more? You can work as much as you want, Mom. Like, you are so good.
Oh
And
my God.
people,
It's the best. It's the
and,
best
pe-
advice. You get
and
your mom.
people, yeah, people
You
love
can't,
her. Yeah.
you can't get more maternal service than from your mom.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Laura
Yes.
is asking, did you say we could order all the tests at one time but have 4 months to do it? No, we didn't say that actually. The
Okay, well, okay. Here's the thing.
okay,
Yes, you can. What I said was that your lab requisition that we send you for the blood testing is good in the Quest system for 3 months,
right.
and then after 3 months, then we have to reissue another one. So we've had people that have ordered testing, they took advantage of it, and they said, "Hey, you know what? We didn't quite. Life came up. We didn't quite get in for the testing yet. Can you renew my order for me?" It's not a big deal. We just go in the system and issue you another lab requisition. So a little bit of work on our part, but we're willing to do that for you so that you can use the test. The
Right. So
Dutch,
that's one thing is a requisition form, validity, length of validity. The other thing is how long the offer of the $30 stands. And the answer is 31st of August. So if you want to take advantage of $30 on each test, which is $90 savings for you, then the answer is until 31st of August. Okay, let's move on to other questions. Robin Evans is asking, what about reverse T3? And what if reverse 3 is high?
yeah. So reverse T3, we don't like to have a lot of reverse T3 again around. Again, I keep having to go back to this, but it's so true. Getting that foundation panel is one of the key things that I use in my practice to actually fix reverse T3 problems. So reverse T3 is the inert T3. It doesn't do anything. And oftentimes we'll build up reverse T3 in times of inflammation or times of nutrient
Stress.
deficiency and so
Yeah.
on, or times of insulin resistance. Again, your primary doctor is probably not checking these. To me, it's foundational that we check these things first. And so I actually order them first before I actually ever order reverse T3. And that's the way I do it because I want these things fixed. And then if I have to order reverse T3, which I do very rarely, because everything is actually much easier to fix without reverse T3 because I know that the foundation is already in place. Very rarely do I actually have to order a reverse T3, although it has been done.
Yeah, and I also believe that you don't really need to order it unless, I mean, you see from the foundation's panel that you've got high cortisol, so you're stressed out, you've got blood sugar problems, insulin resistance. Go and fix those, and it reverse T3 will fix itself. So, and what do we do? Like if somebody insists on ordering that, do they just email support@yourlabwork.com?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any issues at all, you can email us at support@yourlabwork.com. You can always call us at 855-FAST-LAB. We only have one line, so if it's busy, just leave a message. It goes to our email system, and we'll read your thing and get back to you just as soon as we can.
Awesome.
I put that number in here. We had somebody ask a really great question, and we get this all the time. They look online, they Google Quest Diagnostics draw station near me or Quest near me, and they find a list of urine drug screen onlys. These are not phlebotomy places. If it just says drug screen only, it just means they have a person there who's watching you pee into a cup to make sure you're not cheating. Okay, and they do that for employers. And so that person is not a phlebotomist. That person is just an assistant that's just there for that purpose alone. It really, if it doesn't say drug screen only, then it is a regular draw station. And you can always sort of reach out to us if you have questions, but they're pretty accurate if you go to Google it, Quest Draw Station near me. And they change all the time too, by the way, so they update it as quick as they can. Hopefully that doesn't cause too many people trouble. But the Quest, just so you know, we partnered with the Quest because they have thousands of draw locations. And so access for us was really important since we're a national company. And they have the best access of anyone. It doesn't mean it's going to be easy or convenient for you, but it's the best thing that we found.
Mary is asking, is there a separate charge for Quest for the draw? Absolutely not. It's included in the labs.
That's correct. Yeah, they typically
Because you
charge a
just have to get
15.
yourself to Quest, and that's your expense.
Yeah, they typically charge a $15 draw fee, but we're going to cover the draw fee. You should have to pay for zero. Okay, you should never pay for anything, and you never give them your insurance information. We've had some of these sneaky people will take your insurance and they'll bill your insurance, and you'll get a bill for literally 4 to 5 times what you paid for these labs. The average person who, particularly if you have higher deductibles, will save 50 to 80% on the rates, and so not only does this save a lot of people money, you're going to get the test that you want.
And then Gina is asking, is the Lab Master class bonus available through 8/13 as well? Yes, it is. So, we really want to encourage you to order your labs before August 31st. Take advantage of all the bonuses that we have for you. And it's just, we're dealing with human psychology here, where I'll do it later, and then you don't. And so take advantage of the free education you're going to get on October 2nd. It's just really, I can't tell you how much value there is. It always surprises me how few people take advantage of the classes Dr. Allen does. And it's really worth between $300 to $700, for not seeing your naturopath or your functional MD just to interpret the labs. It's going to be so helpful. So that's why we are putting a cap on this, so that you order before August 31st and then get the master class, and then you get a free lab review on 2nd of October. And we're going to be wrapping up here. I'm just going to, because, you see, this is little guy here, Charlie. And Charlie, I'm like, no makeup, totally not prepared for camera. And Charlie is bugging the hell out of me because
Charlie wants to get on. He wants to get on the screen.
He wants to get for a walk. I think that's more of that issue.
So Magdalena, there's one more question that we're kind of getting the same question on, so I want to answer that in regards to the process. We get a lot of people from New York, New Jersey who are, really excited about this, and they want to either order the Dutch or they want to do the blood work. You actually can, if you're willing to drive to a neighboring state, even if you have, a license that says you live in New York. It's the blood draw site that is governed by the state law, not where your address is. Okay. So Dutch will even send you out a kit to your house if you live in New York, but inside the kit, there's going to be a form that says this specimen was not collected within the state of wherever they sent it, New York. And you have to sign that you didn't pee in a cup in New York. You have to say that you went outside the state for 24 hours to pee in this cup, and then you can send it back to Dutch. And Dutch does this just so they can be in compliance with the New York state law and the few others that are there. So if you do live in one of the restricted states, you can get Dutch. You just have to sign a form. You can get blood work, but you do have to go into another state that actually has a blood draw station where it's allowed. So we do have a lot of people that go to Pennsylvania and so on from it's a very common question from New Jersey and New York and so on. Okay, so let's see here.
Let's take maybe one or two more questions,
okay.
And I want to wrap up because we've been going for an hour and a half, and I know when people see that on replay that long, they're gonna.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Guys, we haven't answered your question because you have to remember there is hundreds of comments that came in. Please do email either us, support@hormonesbalance.com, or support@yourlabwork.com. If it's more of a lab question than Dr. Allen's team.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For any lab questions, just email support@yourlabwork.com.
Yeah, and that way we'll take care of you. Okay. All right. So are we good?
Yeah, we're great. I really appreciate the opportunity, guys. I'm super excited about learning. You guys actually make me a lot smarter. So I'm really excited to get together with you on October 2, where we can review some of these results and get to some higher level questions and address very specific concerns.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you for the lovely question. Really great stuff. I know there's even more things coming in about pellets, and there's just so much we can talk. I mean, we really can talk about for 5 hours.
Well, this is what happened last time. We ended up going like 3 hours last time.
Exactly. So I think this is an improvement. We've improved 2 times. We basically cut it in half. So that's a huge one. Thank you so much, Dr. Allen, for being here tonight with us. The links, you guys, are in the page. On the page, you should still see it. With them, 2 great bonuses: $30 per every lab panel. If you're ordering all 3, you're saving $90 on all of this. with a lab review on the 2nd of October. And we're going to be, Dr. Allen has given us access to his lab masterclass, which, especially if you're a practitioner, this is going to be thousands of dollars worth of information for you that you can pass on to your clients. And I know we have a lot of practitioners on our list who are listening to this today. This is going to be just super valuable free information for you. Thanks so much, everyone, for tonight, and have a great night. Bye-bye.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye.